Hello and welcome back. This session is on pollination, its importance and types. And these are the learning goals. 1. State 3 major importance of pollination. 2. Discuss the 2 broad types of pollination. 3. Elaborate on the adaptations for self-pollination. 4. Assert the advantage and disadvantage of self-pollination. 5. Elaborate on the adaptations for cross-pollination. 6. Assert the advantage and disadvantage of cross-pollination. And 7. Analyze the agents of pollination and pollination syndromes. Now we have already learned about the formation of pollen grains and male gametes in the anther, and the formation of ambryosac and female gamete in the ovule. Now, these gametes are to get fertilized, and this can happen when they come together. So, how do the gametes meet together? This is achieved by pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollens from the anther to the stigma of one plant or between different plants. For a successful pollination, the plant must be of the same species. For example, pollens from a rose plant can only be germinating on a rose stigma. Pollens from other species, such as a marigold, cannot germinate on the stigma of rose. Now, before going into further details, let us first look at some of the importance of pollination. As pollination facilitates meeting of the gametes, it leads to the creation of new seeds that can grow into new plants. And secondly, pollination is not just a fascinating natural phenomenon, it's an essential ecological function. In fact, pollination is a life evidence for interdependent relationship. Plants are dependent on animals for pollination, and animals are dependent on the plants for food. In nature, everything is interconnected. If one is affected, it affects everything in the food web. Thus, pollination helps in the maintenance of biodiversity. Pollination is equally important for human survival. According to the US Forest Service, of the 1,400 crop plants grown around the world, almost 80% require pollination by animals. And it's estimated that 1/3 of our food production depends on pollinators. Thus, we must take actions to help pollinators survive, or else our food supply will get threatened. Now, let's study the 2 broad types of pollination, which are self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination happens within the same plant, and it's further divided into 2 subtypes, Autogamy and Geitonogamy. If the pollens are transferred on the stigma of the same flower, such self-pollination is autogamy. On the other hand, when pollens from one flower are transferred to the stigma of another flower of the same plant, it is then referred to as Geitonogamy. You can see these pollination types in the figure. A represents autogamy and B represents Geitonogamy. The C model represents the second type of pollination called as cross-pollination. And this pollination is technically referred to as Xenogamy. In In cross-pollination, pollens from one plant are transferred to stigma of another plant. And this introduces some degree of variations in the population. However, self-pollination is an easier and less energy expensive process. And plants do possess adaptations to ensure self-pollination, such as Xenogamy. Now, this is a phenomenon where self-pollination and self-fertilization occurs in permanently closed flowers. And such permanently closed flowers are called as Xenogamous flowers. These flowers remain closed in the bud state, and the unexposed stigma receives its own pollen. Therefore, Xenogamous conditions always lead to assured autogamy. And it's a common kind of occurrence in plants like Viola, Commelina, Oxalis, Impatiens, and many others. The interesting and intriguing aspects of these plants is the appearance of two types of flowers in them. They have the closed Xenogamous kind of flowers as well as the open normal flowers, which are called as Chasmogamous flowers. Now, here's an image of the two types of flowers in Viola. A is the open Chasmogamous normal flowers, and B are the Xenogamous closed flowers. Secondly, plants also show a phenomenon known as homogamy. And this is the simultaneous maturation of the male and female reproductive organs. A mature pollen lands on the mature stigma of the same plant, which thereby allows successful self-pollination. And such pollination is seen in plants like Vinca rosea and Mirabilis. Now, what are the advantages of self-pollination? Well, since self-pollination occurs within the same plant, it helps in the maintenance of purity of genes or characters from generation to generation. Besides, there is less wastage of pollen grains, and hence the plants are not required to produce large quantities of pollen. But let us also be aware of the disadvantages of self-pollination. There is lack of variation or genetic diversity in the population as the gametes come from one plant. When self-pollination is prolonged or continued for a long period of time, it leads to inbreeding depression, which implies that there is a reduced fitness in the population. And as a result of self-pollination, such populations of the clones or inbred lines also show lower vigor and vitality. And they are also prone to diseases due to the increase in homozygosity. Now, because of such limitations, most of the plants prefer cross-pollination over self-pollination. So, how do the bisexual flowers avoid self-pollination? Let us study some of the adaptations favoring cross-pollination. Some plants have developed unisexuality. Such plants are called as unisexual or dioecious plants. Now, they have separate male and female plants, such as in cases of papaya plant. In papaya, the male papaya plants have purely staminate flowers, and the female papaya plant has pistillate flowers. in some other plants such as the cucumber, the flowers are unisexual. They have separate pistillate and staminate flowers carried on the same cucumber plant, and thereby they can be avoiding self-pollination and promoting cross-pollination. Next, some plants show a phenomenon known as dichogamy, which is the phenomenon where the maturation of the male and the female reproductive organs occur at different times, and this is opposite to homogamy. Now, this is seen in cases of plants like salvia, where the anthers mature earlier than the gynoecium. So, because the anther mature earlier, when the mature pollen lands on the stigma, it fails to germinate because the stigma are still immature and are not receptive. Likewise, there is another phenomenon known as heterostyly. Heterostyly is a phenomenon where there is variation in the length of the style. And this is seen in plants such as primroses. In primroses, we have two types of flowers, trump flowers and pin flowers. Trump flowers have shorter style and long filaments, whereas the pin flowers have a longer style and shorter filaments. So, generally, pollens from the trump flower are transferred to the stigma of the pin flowers, promoting cross-pollination between them. Yet another feature is known as Herkogamy. Now, this is a physical barrier between anthers and stigma of the same flower. For example, in the milkweed or calotropis, pollens are enclosed in a membranous bag-like structure called as pollinia. And such cover on the pollens would prevent the direct contact of the pollens with the stigma, thereby avoiding self-pollination. Next is self-incompatibility. And this is considered to be the most effective method of avoiding self-pollination. It can be also studied as a pollen-pistil interaction. Here, the stigma is directly responsible for the rejection of self-pollen. And it's a genetically controlled mechanism where self-pollens having the same genetic composition as the stigma are rejected by the stigma. In the cartoon, you can see two colors of pollens on the stigma. Red color indicates self-pollens with a genotype S1, S2, and blue color indicates foreign pollens with a genotype S3, S4. Since the genotype of the stigma is also S1, S2, self-pollen become incompatible and gets rejected. Whereas the pollens which are having a different genotype to that of the stigma, that is the genotype of the foreign pollens which are S3, S4 type, gets accepted. So, in this way, plants are intelligent enough to prevent self-pollination and promote cross-pollination. All these techniques employed by the plants to favor cross-pollination and to avoid self-pollination are collectively referred to as outbreeding devices. So, now let's look at the advantages of cross-pollination. The obvious one is the introduction of variation in the progeny. Increased genetic variation would improve in the fitness as well as survival of the population. At the same time, the hybrids obtained through cross-pollination or cross-fertilization acquires increased hybrid vigor over their parent plants. Nonetheless, cross-pollination has drawbacks in terms of more wastage of or loss of pollen grains, since the two different plants involved in pollination are always not at close proximity. And in some cases, the mixing of the characters may go wrong. There are chances of undesirable recombinations which can lower the quality of the population or the plant. Well, pollination is not an exclusive plant function. It involves two chief types of agents, which are abiotic agents and biotic agents. Abiotic or physical agents can be predominantly wind, and wind pollination is referred to as anemophily, whereas in some of the plants it can be pollinated by water, which is called as hydrophily. Biotic agents include a variety of animals such as insects, birds, bats, lizards, and mammals. Pollination by insects is collectively known as entomophily, whereas pollination by birds is referred to as ornithophily, and pollination by bats is called as chiropterophily. In nature, we do see so many different types of flowers to our fascination. And such vast diversity in the shape, color, size, nectar and odor of the flower are significantly associated with co-evolution. Plants have evolved their flowers to attract the pollinators, and the pollinators have too changed to suit to the flowers over time. So such mechanisms or adaptations are collectively referred to as pollination syndromes. Now let us look at some of the pollination syndromes. In a wind-pollinated flower, such as grasses, maize, or in sugarcane, the male flowers form inflorescence and they are present at the tip of the plant so that they can be having a better exposure to the wind. And the flowers are dull, inconspicuous, nectarless, and odorless. The female flowers possess tufts of feathery, long and large stigmas in order to collect the air-blown pollens. The most predominant insect pollinators are the bees. And flowers pollinated by bees tend to have bright colors such as blue, yellow or violet color. Bees can also see colors in the UV range. The flowers possess lots of nectar as well as they have conspicuous size and they are scented. And the positions of the anthers are in such a way which can ensure easy dusting of the sticky pollens at the back of the bees. The flowers have prominent landing platforms as well as there are lines on the petals which serves as nectar guides to the insects. Similarly, butterfly pollinated flowers can carry the nectar deep inside the tubular corolla, which can be easily reached by the long tongue of the butterflies. And such flowers are bright in color as well as has prominent landing platform. Likewise, moth-pollinated flowers are usually white and have a strong scent. And such features allows the moth to locate the flowers in the dark. Now here's an image of a yucca flower with few yucca moths. Yucca plant and yucca moth share a very intimate relationship, helping in the survival of each other. You'll be doing a research on them as a part of your this week's assignment. Now looking into the bird-pollinated flowers, birds are commonly attracted to red or orange colored flowers. And these flowers do not have a strong scent, as the sense of the smell in birds is underdeveloped. Yet the flowers need to produce large quantities of nectars, and these nectars are carried deep within the tubular corolla. And finally, flowers which are pollinated by bats are large, sturdy, and light colored. They also produce a strong musty odours in order to attract the bats. So from the above explorations, we can truly appreciate the interdependent interaction between the plants and the animals. Moreover, pollination syndromes are a great example of co-evolution. Both the flowers and the pollinators adapt to each other's change over time. So let me conclude this session with a quote: "All have their worth and each contributes to the worth of the others." Now comes your assignment. I have provided pollinator profiles which you will use to assign the appropriate pollinator to the flowers below. And here are the pollinator profile. The second point of the assignment is to do a case study on the two unique interspecies interaction. One, interaction between yucca plant and yucca moth, and second is the interaction between fig trees and wasp pollinator.